the greatest things that you can ever invest in is the ability to effectively communicate. Why? Because we're always relating to other people. And as we relate to other people, what we're really wanting is to feel connected to the person that we're communicating with. So in order to do that, there are about 8 different things that I've found to be so fundamental when it comes to being able to connect with someone in a deep spiritual way. And I call this spiritual communication because what we're using is our awareness. What we're using is the power of our awareness to implement all of these 8 different tools that I'm going to outline shortly. But before I begin, if at any point you find that this information is helpful, then please like, share, subscribe, or comment so that more people have access to this video. And if you feel that what I'm saying is resonating with you and you're interested in working with me, then please reach out to me at the email provided in the description box below. Active listening. It is a rare breed of human being who can actually listen to you when you're speaking with them. Maybe even on an unconscious level, what's happening is that the person who's speaking begins to feel that you are giving them something. And what you're giving them is your undivided attention. Now, I promise you, this is so rare. Because when most people listen to someone or they think they're listening to someone, they're not really listening. What they're doing is they're thinking about what they're going to say next, or they're thinking about something else entirely, or they're looking at something on their phone or outside, they're distracted, or they're just really good at saying, oh, wow, that's interesting. And that's typically what happens when we're having a phone call with someone. It's a lot easier to get away with that one. But when you're in person, people do this too. You can even feel that the person that you're speaking with is just tuning out. By active listening, what I mean is that you've decided, you've set the intention before you have the conversation with someone that you are going to give them your undivided attention, your full awareness, without thinking about what you're going to say next or getting distracted by something else that's going on outside of you. You're just going to be with this person. The reason why this is so healing for the other person is because when we're fully present with someone, it's very healing because you're giving them all the space that they need in order to be where they're at. Intentional pausing. This next tool has to do with learning how to pause when you're talking with someone. A huge part of what makes a conversation feel so good is the pace of the conversation. And a lot of the time we can set that pace by creating intentional pauses when we're speaking to somebody. And you do this whenever somebody finishes a sentence, you just take a pause. So it can be a few seconds, you can take a breath, not a loud one, but just take a moment to pause and sort of digest what the other person just said, and then speak. Now, what this does is it creates even more spaciousness within the conversation, more room for the both of you to have all that space that you need to be and say and do and behave in the way that feels most comfortable. This creates a feeling of ease, a feeling of less judgment, a feeling of relaxation within the conversation. A good example of when this doesn't happen is when two people are arguing. When two people are fighting, there's very little pausing happening. So there isn't breathing room for both people to feel that they're able to freely speak and say whatever it is that they want to say. Creating a pause also adds to this active listening process because when we're listening deeply, we definitely pause. Anything that encroaches on that feeling of spaciousness within the conversation is going to diminish the feeling of freedom, the feeling of reciprocity between these two people. So pausing really heightens this active listening, avoiding the temptation to interrupt. This is always a big one for me, and I don't know that I've completely mastered it, but I do know that it interrupts the beautiful natural flow of a conversation when you interrupt someone. When we're interrupting someone, we're not really listening because we're not allowing that other person the space to complete what it is that they're saying. We're again getting back into that mode of I'm thinking about what I'm thinking about instead of listening to you. And so I'm going to jump in and tell you what I'm thinking about. Forget about what you're saying. I need to tell you what's on my mind. So when we interrupt someone, we've dropped the active listening. We've definitely dropped the intentional pause. And instead, we're breaking the natural flow of the conversation. Now, sometimes it's a fact that you're going to find that you talk to people who just go on and on and on and on when you're talking to them, and you can't get a word in edgewise. Now, in that case, you have to ask yourself, is this the type of person that I want to continually spend my time speaking with? If it is, that's on you. That's wonderful. But if you don't enjoy having conversations with this person, then ask yourself why you're giving so much of your time over to somebody who is so one-sided. Something I've noticed in my own relationships with people is that with certain people, I have a certain dynamic with them, a certain way of relating and communicating with this person, and we almost get into a pattern of speech. And the dynamic can be one of, this person just goes on and on and on and on, and I feel like I can't get a word in, so I'm going to have to interrupt them once in a while if I want to feel like there's some balance in the conversation. Now, when you have a relationship with someone and it's that way, what you can do is practice not interrupting them and see what happens. Because sometimes you'll find that what's interesting is once that other person feels that you're actually giving them the complete freedom to say whatever it is they need to say fully, then they actually feel that they can listen to you more fully. And then they give you a turn to speak and you don't need to interrupt them. This is really worth trying to see if you can shift out of those old patterns with this person. Summarize what you heard. I read a book about 7 years ago called Never Split the Difference, Negotiate as if your life depended on it. And the book is by Chris Voss, a former FBI hostage negotiator. I actually found the book to be sort of off-putting because it felt very manipulative, but there was something in there that I found interesting. And what he said was, when you listen to somebody, it's very beneficial to summarize what it is that you heard them say. I know that when I've experienced somebody doing this for me, I really do feel that they get me, they heard me. And a huge part of feeling connected to the other person is that you feel that they understand you on some level. Maybe they can't relate to what you're going through, but you want the other person to feel that they get it. Awareness, awareness, awareness. At the root of all of our spiritual practices is learning how to increase your awareness. By now, if you've watched enough of my videos, what I mean by that is regaining the awareness, which is what we are, so that we're bringing 100% of our awareness to the conversation that we're having with someone. This practice is the cream of the crop. It doesn't get more important than being aware when you're in the presence of another person. The more aware that you are of everything that they're saying, everything that they're feeling, their body language, the way they're expressing something, the tone in which they say something, all of these things, all of this awareness that you have is going to lend itself to both of you feeling more connected. A really important thing to note here is that awareness is a very pure state of being. It doesn't involve judgment. It doesn't involve any sort of emotionality. It is just pure being. Nothing is more delicious than connecting with someone in that way. The power of concentration. The more I practice concentration techniques, which is a huge part of Self-Realization Fellowship, and so much of what Yogananda speaks about has to do with honing the skill of concentration. He says that every successful person has an incredible ability to concentrate. And the opportunity that we're presented with every single time we have a conversation with someone is one of concentration. It's the opportunity to fully fixate single-pointedly on what it is that this person is saying to you and learning the art of communicating with this other person, learning how to listen, learning how to pause, learning how to speak in a way where you're fully present with this person, not interrupting them, being able to quickly summarize what it is that you're hearing them say. Now, the biggest part of concentration is learning how to not get distracted. This is such a huge pet peeve of mine. And it's this. When you're talking with someone, let's say you're going on a hike with someone and you're having a conversation with them, and you're deep in conversation, you're talking about something really juicy. And then all of a sudden, the person that you're speaking with looks over and goes, "Oh my God, what a beautiful flower. Wow, look at that." And you're going, "What?" What just happened? We were just having a wonderful talk about this thing, and now you're talking about a flower. And this is extremely annoying because what happens when this other person gets distracted? It's literally like dropping the ball. You feel like, come on, what just happened? I mean, we were having a deep conversation about something, and then in a split second, you're now distracted by this beautiful flower. This is another thing that we can just be mindful of. Maybe it's a habit. Maybe the other person just obviously they don't think it's such a big deal. Or they're just completely unaware of the fact that they are even doing this. This is why it's so important that we bring awareness into our everyday actions, that we become more aware of what we're doing, how we're behaving, how we're interacting with other people, so that we can start to begin to notice our blind spots. Another obvious example of this is when someone gets a text message when you're talking to them, or they're scrolling through their Instagram account, right? These are very obvious examples, but they're very real and true to what is happening now. So again, be mindful of what it is that you're doing when you're with someone. Can you be fully present with who you're talking to? Can you let go of being distracted? And the reason why this doesn't work is because it's disrespectful. On a very basic level, you're telling the other person, "I don't really feel like you deserve 100% of me right now. I'll give you 70%, but 30% is going to go to Instagram." That's why this doesn't feel good to the other person. That's why our relationships aren't going to fully heal unless we decide, unless we set the intention to give ourselves fully to the person that we're communicating with. Ask questions. I can't tell you how many times I get on a call with a friend or a relative and the conversation is very one-sided. But it really doesn't feel nice when you feel that you get in a conversation with someone and it's just about them and they never ask you how you're doing. They never stop and think to say, "Wow, Margot, how are you doing? What's going on in your life?" So when we ask questions, what we do is we show genuine interest in the other person. And this allows the other person to also feel seen and heard and validated by you. They feel that you actually care. We can think of asking questions as questions equal interest. So the more questions you ask, the more interest you show in someone. This is very obvious and apparent when you first start dating someone. When two people start dating, what do? They ask each other all these questions. Why? Because they want to get to know this person. They're interested in finding out more about you because they find you interesting. And unfortunately, when we have a long-standing history with someone, we forget to ask them questions. We just talk about ourselves or we just show a lack of interest in them. And that really deteriorates the relationship. So questions create this excitement. It creates this feeling that you care about this person, that you're interested in getting to know more about how they think, how they feel, what's happening in their life. That brings the juice, the energy to a conversation. Being mindful of giving and taking. This ability to really be mindful when you're speaking with someone of how much you're saying and how much they're saying, how much you're listening, how much they're listening. Basically, this give and take, this feeling of reciprocity within the conversation, and creating a balance of that give and take is so fundamental when it comes to feeling that both people are satiated in the conversation. Have you ever noticed when you get off a call with someone, or maybe you see them in person, and after you leave, you have this feeling that, oh my God, that was such a good conversation. I really thoroughly enjoyed that. I loved being around that person. And the reason why, a huge part of why that is because there was this balance of giving and taking. There's this mutual exchange of energy. And that's why we can think of this in a spiritual sense, because if you think of your conversation as being an exchange of energy, then you can be mindful of how much you're giving and how much you're taking. And the more we find that balance, the more connected the two of you are going to feel, because then it becomes this beautiful dance. Then you're giving and they're taking, you're listening and they're listening, and there's this wonderful exchange of energy that happens. And at the end of it, it's as if you've filled one another up with the other person's energy. And it's such an incredible feeling when you have that type of conversation, as opposed to when you have a conversation with someone and they just take and take and take and take. At the end of that kind of conversation, you feel very depleted. And so what happens? Not only do you feel disconnected from that person, but you feel drained and you don't want to communicate with them again. But when we learn this art of balancing our energy as we communicate, then we begin to have really deep connectivity with the other person. And yes, this does require two people, but this can be learned, this can be practiced. Because when we practice shifting out of those negative patterns with people that we've already established negative patterns with, we begin to retrain those relationships, and we do that solely on our part. And then the other person gets to learn how it is that they can begin to be with you. They learn by your example how to effectively communicate with you. And this does take time, but things do eventually shift if the other person has enough awareness to do that. Not taking things personally. Ooh, this is a big one. This is a big one. It's not an easy one to do. I'll be the first one to admit that. But if we have enough awareness as we're talking with someone, and you feel that you are beginning to get triggered and take things personally, you can bring that witness consciousness to those feelings, and you can pause and you can decide, I'm not going to take this personally. Because 99.9% of the time, the reason why people fight is because they're taking something personally. It's because something that the other person has said is affecting you personally. It's hitting one of your wounds, and you are now reacting to what this person is saying instead of responding to what they're saying. You've gone into protection mode, defense mode, and you are now spewing whatever reactivity you're having onto them. This is what happens right before an argument. Because remember, all of what we're talking about when we're talking about letting go has to do with letting go of the personal self. Whenever we feel defensive, whenever we feel attacked, whenever we feel like a victim, it is simply because we have identified with our ego. We have identified with what we think to be true about who we are. And that is what gets us into trouble. And that is what makes us argue. So what I find that is extremely helpful is I begin to notice and ask myself, am I starting to become defensive? And then I ask myself, what is it that I'm defending? Because the minute you start to ask those questions, you've stepped out of identification with the feeling and you've now witnessed the feeling. You're now in a place of asking, of questioning, of observing the feeling. And that's the key. And the ego, your lower self, your mind-made sense of self, is always going to defend itself. It's always trying to protect itself because it feels limited. So I find that to be the back door into getting out of being reactive. I hope that this video was helpful, and I hope that you can start playing around with some of these and experiment with them. Put them to the test. Don't just take my word for it. I love you all so much. Until next time, remember to let go. Let go of trying to be anything other than the truth of what you are.